Well, certainly, yes. The Tulane game was a bit of a slap in the face as to, okay, we survived that. Now let's figure out what's wrong with this football team. Once Oklahoma got to that West Virginia game, I think that's really when the heat started to pour onto Spencer Rattler, when they only scored 16 points. And if I recall, his stat line was really good from that game, but they just didn't drive the ball down the field. It was a lot of underneath stuff. West Virginia, they too had I don't remember the scenario, but they as well had a shot to win the game. Whether they missed a field goal that would have tied it, or they had some kind of series in Oklahoma's side of the field late in the game. Also, which comes to mind when you bring up Kansas, similar to the Tulane situation, I wasn't rooting against Oklahoma, but I did want to see the scenario if Caleb Williams hadn't made that heads up play to gain the first down. Yeah, it was 35-23, but it was 28-23 at that point. Kansas gets the ball down 28-23 in decent field position, and who knows? And Kansas, I'm not saying this to in any way try to predict that they're going to be the surprise team of the conference by any stretch. I think we're all going to, by default, pencil them in for 0-9 in the conference. Maybe they squeeze out a win against somebody and go 1-8, probably 2-10 for the season. But they had the Oklahoma performance where they were up by something like 10 points in the second half and only had that, one score deficit with a chance to get the ball back in the closing minutes. Then down the stretch, sure, they had their share of their typical just getting completely annihilated. But late in the season, they went to Texas on the road, beat Texas. TCU and West Virginia were not great teams, but certainly they're far superior to Kansas. And they took them both to a one-score game to close out the season. So they were a much improved team down the stretch. And now we'll see if they can maybe be a little bit better than they typically are and make it difficult on the likes of Texas Tech and TCU and some teams like that.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I was just kind of looking back at the, when you look at it, Kansas really did outplay Oklahoma in that game. Had more first downs, had more total yards. To your point, had the 10-0 lead at halftime, had a 17-7 lead in the third quarter, and then it was the 4th down and 1 play that we'd mentioned where Caleb Williams made the very, very heady, intelligent play that he did. So Oklahoma had it 4th and 1 at their own 46, up 28-23 with about 3 minutes and 20 seconds to go. So if he doesn't make that play, Oklahoma hadn't done a really good job at stopping Kansas. I think Jason Bean had his best performance of the year last year against Oklahoma, and so who knows what happens if they don't score. And obviously Oklahoma goes ahead and scores and scores a touchdown late on that drive, with less than a minute to go. But yeah, I think it'll be that's just one example. As you mentioned, the West Virginia game, I think West Virginia turned the ball over around midfield or somewhere in Oklahoma, the early part of Oklahoma territory, and then Gabe Burkich hits a field goal to win the game for Oklahoma. And so I think all of this kind of sets up interesting for a story that I saw come. It's just it's funny. A story that I saw, I think came from CBS Sports, where there was an interview with Caleb Williams, and he talked about how just incredibly uncomfortable and kind of depressed that he was last year early on in the season. Didn't feel like that he had a good enough. He didn't get a fair shot early on. And then you'd kind of mentioned how Spencer Rattler struggled a little bit, obviously in that West Virginia game. Got booed a little bit in that game, obviously, and then he was okay in that game. Within Kansas State, the next week it was actually pretty good, and so I think a lot of people thought, okay, maybe he's turning the corner again, and then we all know what happened with Texas and moving forward. But anyway, Caleb had talked about how awkward of a situation it was, and how tough of a situation it was for him coming in last year, knowing that he felt like he really didn't have a good shot to be that to be that guy. It wasn't necessarily as open of a competition as he was hopeful of. He was led to believe, and then obviously as things happened, he got more confidence and he started doing that. And so it's kind of, I don't know, funny, ironic, weird, whatever adjective you want to use to describe it. That story comes out, and he moves on and plays for the coach that he was a little bit struggling with. So I
Yeah.
thought that was kind of interesting hearing that. I didn't necessarily know a whole lot about that, and I was a little bit shocked to see that that he was really unhappy early on. I kind of thought coming in he would understand that with Spencer Rattler being the incumbent, being a Heisman Trophy almost leading candidate coming into the season last year, that obviously wanted to play, but knew that he was the guy and he'd have to do something pretty special to be to unseat him early on in the season.